Well, judging by the stage, I think it's officially Christmas season. But y'all, October the 1st, Danny, is Danny in here? Did he say October the 1st is when he begins listening to Christmas music? I don't know, that's a little bit early. I think that's like, it's still 75 degrees here, right, on October the 1st? That's kind of crazy, maybe a tad bit early, but it's funny that he shared that because what I wanted to do as we started off was to have a little survey, and it goes along right with what Danny said. And the question I want to ask you guys, and you guys can respond just by raising your hand if you want to, or if you feel very, very passionately about this question, you can yell out a little yell if you want to, okay? Whatever you want to do. The question is, when does Christmas season officially start for you? Okay? You don't have to yell it out yet. I got a couple of options up here that we're going to go through. Excuse me. And if you see your option, either raise your hand, or again, if you feel really passionate about it, feel free to yell out a little scream, okay? So here's the first one. I didn't go all the way back to October 1st. Sorry, Danny. I didn't even think that would have been an option. Here's the first one. Cold weather. Anyone out there, when cold weather hits, you're like, oh yeah, it's Christmas time. One or two, a few guys. That's right. We had maybe two at the first service. Most people wanted to wait a little while. Here's the next one is after Thanksgiving. Anyone after Thanksgiving, like that's the time. Yeah, oh, people are a little more, kind of maybe. All right, so, and here's the last option, December 1st or later. Anyone December 1st or later? This is the procrastinators of the group right here, right? So my wife and I, we're like that. We have our Christmas tree up. It's pre-lit, and we don't have any decorations on it yet, but that's all we have. So we're this December 1st and later group. In fact, a few weeks ago, I think it was right after Thanksgiving, I pulled up to our house, or maybe right before Thanksgiving, and I pulled in and I looked, and as I was pulling in, I noticed there was a pumpkin on our front porch. And then I walked into the house, and there was a Thanksgiving decoration on the wall. And then that night, I looked out, and I forgot we had left our lights up kind of on the tree, and I'd already plugged those in, and the lights on the tree were up. So we had 3 different holidays that we were celebrating all on the same day. It was really funny. We've gotten the Halloween stuff out of the way, and our Thanksgiving stuff is finally gone. But yeah, so another thing I noticed with this is these are the 3 options, as I was thinking about this, that these are the 3 options that most people usually choose from when it comes to the Christmas season. But being a father of 4 and having a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old and 2 3-year-olds, I realized that there's another option out there. And I never would have thought of this before this year. Let me tell you what happened. So about a little before Thanksgiving, I was sleeping one night. We have a dog and a cat. And I was sleeping, and I kept being woken up by this sound. And it was kind of like a sound of like, it's like the pages rustling or whatever. And our cat and our dog like to wake up in the middle of the night and go kind of get into things and see what they can find. So I woke up a couple of times just thinking, oh, it must be Maddie, our dog, or Basil, our cat. It was something else. And so I got up. Finally, I woke up well enough to go and use the restroom. And so I got up. I looked, and the cat was laying there on the bed. And so I was like, it's not the cat. Then I walked around and head to the bathroom, and our dog was laying there in our bedroom on the floor, on the carpet. I was like, oh, it's not Maddie, it's not our dog either. And so then my mind starts to think, we have a cotton field behind our house, and so we have mice that try to get into our house all the time. In fact, the only reason we have a cat is to keep the mice away. If we didn't have mice, we probably wouldn't have a cat. So I started thinking, oh no, there's mice have gotten in the house. They didn't even care this year that we have a cat. They were just infesting. They're in there getting into things. And so I use the restroom. I come out, and I sneak into our living room area and peek around the corner, and it wasn't a mouse either. What it was our 5-year-old. Her name is Macy, and what she was doing, it was 3:30 a.m., 3:30 a.m., just so you know, she was propped up in our rocking chair, and she had the Target gift booklet guide that you get in the mail mailing, and she had a pen, and she was laid back going through every page and circling and putting her initials on everything that she wanted. And so I was like, Macy, what are you doing? And she said, oh, I thought it was morning time. I was like, no, girl, it's 3:30 a.m. You have to go back to bed. And I looked a little closer, and I noticed that she wasn't just, circling more things, because they'd already looked through it once. She wasn't just circling more things and putting M on there. She was also scratching out our oldest daughter, Lucy's initials, and putting her initials over it so that she could have now what Lucy wanted, because she always wants what Lucy wants. And so for that, I was like, oh, so maybe the Christmas season starts when you start to get all these booklets, these mailings in the mail for all of the Christmas gifts that are out there. And that was kind of in between the cold weather and after Thanksgiving. But it really is the Christmas season. And so what I wanted to do this morning, our official church-wide Christmas series starts next week. But I wanted to kind of go ahead and get our minds and our hearts, thinking about Christmas and moving in that direction. And so my goal this morning is very simply to help us elevate in our minds and in our hearts how important Christmas is. And I think if we can do that, and then we can elevate that in our minds and in our hearts and in our faith, and then allow that to encourage us, to inspire us to do something that we maybe never thought of doing this Christmas for someone else, I think we've done a lot this morning. And so that's my goal. And what I want to start off with is just asking the simple question, well, what really is Christmas all about? If you watch the Hallmark movies, you'll get one answer about what Christmas is about. If you ask your kids, you'll get another answer. They'll probably say it's all about the gifts. Hallmark movies all about finding love or finding your purpose in life or whatever it may be. It may be for you about giving to other people. There's a lot of things. You come to church, and of course, it's all about Jesus. As Danny said a little bit earlier, that Christmas is all about the gift of Jesus. And so I want to use that answer, but I want to tweak it a little bit and give a different answer. And this is what that is that Christmas is about glory. And that's going to be your first fill in the blank. I want to kind of expand on that and talk about that a little bit this morning. If you have your Bible, if you have your apps, however you access God's Word, we're going to go to John, the Gospel of John, and we're going to look at the Christmas story in the Gospel of John. Now, if any of you guys have ever read the Bible, you probably would have just been like, what do you mean the Christmas story in the Gospel of John? Because John doesn't give us the Christmas story. I don't know if you knew that. So there's 4 Gospels. There's Matthew, there's Mark, there's Luke, there's John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all share from right at the beginning of their Gospel, their chapters, they're part of the Bible. They share the story of Christmas with Jesus and Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem. There's no room, going to the manger. Jesus is born. The shepherds come, the wise men come. All of that happens in all of the Gospels except for John. And yet I still think that John shares a Christmas story. And I want to share that with you. It's right at the beginning of John, because I think the reason John doesn't share that maybe is because it's already been done. These other 3 authors, these other 3 apostles, they already shared the story. And so John is approaching it from a different aspect. And what John is wanting to answer is, who exactly is this Jesus that came that Christmas morning? And so John 1, we're going to pick up right there, and then we're going to focus in on John 14. But this is what it says, John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made. Nothing made was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now skip down to verse 9. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not even receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And then we really focus in here, and it's going to be up on the screen, verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, if you have your outlines, what I want you to just start off with, and if you have a pen, I want you to circle 2 words in that verse that's right there, John 1:14. I want you to circle the word, which is right there at the beginning. And I also want you to circle the word glory, because I really want to focus in on these 2 words and talk about how these 2 words reveal that Christmas is all about glory. And so the first word, I'm going to kind of go reverse order. The first word is glory. Glory is kind of one of those Christianese words at times, isn't it? Like, we use it a lot in the church, and we talk about it a lot. We talk about glorifying God. We talk about the glory of God, the glory of Jesus, glory, glory. We use that word a whole lot. And so what I like to do when I come across a word that's kind of vague, like what exactly does glory mean? I like to, look at it, kind of research it a little bit, and then I like to take it and put it in very, very easy and simple terms so that I can understand it a lot better. So that's what I did with the glory. And so when I think of the word glory, this is what I think of. It's very simple, 5 words. All that God truly is. So what glory is, when we talk about glory and when it is with God, we talk about all that God truly is. So if you think about God, all the power that he has, all the knowledge that he has, all the wisdom, all the mercy that he shows, all the love, all the kindness, all the forgiveness, all the grace, all of the things that God is, if you were to take each one of those and think about it and then put them all together, all of that together is glory, the glory of God. And so we're talking about something that's pretty magnificent, something that's pretty amazing, something that's incredibly, incredibly huge, the glory of God. All that God truly is, every single aspect of his being, every one of his characteristics that he is glory. And so that's the glory of God. And so when we talk about glorifying God, I'm sure you've heard that many times in the church. When we talk about glorifying God, basically all that means is in our lives, in our speech, in our actions, in our thoughts, in our choices, in every part of our life, we are recognizing all that God truly is. And so when we encourage believers, when we encourage Christians to glorify God, basically what we're saying is all that God is, just replicate that. Just be the same for other people. Just do that in all of your actions and all of your thoughts and everything that you are, recognize and show all that God truly is. And so that's glory. The other word that you circled is word. Now, word is huge because it says over and over again. Think of how many times do we see the word in this over and over again. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. And then in verse 14, the Word became flesh and he made his dwelling among us. And so what in the world is John talking about when he's talking about the Word? Well, the short answer is he's talking about Jesus, right? But here's a little better way to think of it, and this is how I think of it. The Word is the embodiment of that glory. So all that God is, all that God, all of his characteristics, the sum of his greatness, the embodiment of that is the Word. So you think back to creation in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How did God create the heavens and the earth? He spoke it into existence. It was his Word that created, and that creation is what? Reflecting the glory of God even now as we speak. All of creation sings the praises and the glory of God. And so God speaking, his word creates a creation that embodies his glory. And then we see here in John that the word is not just what his words were, it's actually Jesus. Jesus himself was that word. And then if you look even further into this, in the book of John, he was writing to this Greek, Hellenistic Greek group, and they had a word for the word called logos, and that's the word here in the Greek. And that actually means, to the Greek mind, the embodiment of all things, like the underlying principle of everything that there is in the world. And so when John uses this term, the Word, he is saying this is Jesus. He's saying this is the embodiment of all of the glory of God, all of God's magnificence, all of his forgiveness and love and power and wisdom and justice. All of that is embodied in this word. It's the underlying principle of all that is in everything that we see and everything that we can feel, can touch, everything in all of creation. This is the embodiment of it, and this is Jesus. See, that's a huge deal. The Word is Jesus, and the Word is all of these things, and it's the embodiment of all that God is. And so then in John 1:18, a couple verses later, he kind of sums it up like this. He says, "No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known." And I take that to mean this, that Christmas is God revealing his glory to us through his Son. That if you want to boil down what is Christmas as a believer in Jesus, as a follower of Christ, what does it mean for our faith? This, I think, is as good as any other definition that you can give to Christmas. It's Jesus came, he became a human, and he did that so that we could see all of the greatness of who God is, so that we could see all of the wisdom of God, so that we could see all the forgiveness and all the mercy and all the love. Everything that God is, we can see through the person of Jesus. And that all began at Christmas when Jesus came to this earth. And I think that's pretty awesome. And so here's what that means to me is if that's what Jesus was, so Jesus glorified God in everything that he did by revealing all that God was, that means for us that we can glorify God now in our lives the same way that Jesus did then. And so there's no better way in our lives to glorify God, to make him known, to show to the world all that he is this Christmas season, but not just this Christmas season, in all of our life. There's no better way to do that than to open up our Bibles, to read the New Testament, to see what Jesus did and do the same thing. And so what I want to do is I want to go to another passage that isn't usually associated with Christmas. It's Philippians 2, verses 5 through 11. And we're going to go to that passage because I want to ask the question, well, then what did Jesus do? So if there's no better way to glorify God than to do the same things Jesus did, well, tell me, what did Jesus do so that I can do that as well? And this is what Philippians 2 says. In your relationship with one another, this is Paul writing to the Philippians, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. He's already creating this principle. Do the same thing that Jesus did. Have the same mindset that Jesus had. And this is what he says. Who, talking about Jesus, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So that passage right there that Paul is speaking is just this overarching, like bird's eye view of Jesus' entire life. You know, so what Paul is saying is if you look at the life of Jesus beginning at Christmas, ending at Easter, and then beyond when he's seated in heaven by the Father, at the right hand of the Father, being exalted, being glorified, this is what his life was all about. Jesus ultimately was lifted up, right? But in order for him to be lifted up, to be exalted, he had to come down. He had to come down to this earth. He had to look down where we were, and he had to come be one of us. And so what I think, that's kind of my general principle. For Jesus to glorify God in the way that God intended him to, for Jesus to really show the glory of God, Jesus had to come down. And that's what we celebrate Christmas for. And so for us to truly live out the Christmas spirit during this holiday season and really the rest of our lives, we have to do the same. We have to come down in those exact same ways. And so I want to talk about a few of those ways. The first one is this, that we must come down by forsaking our comfortable place. Think about Jesus. Think about him in heaven before he came that Christmas morning. Think about the situation that he was living in. It was perfect. It was sinless. He was being worshiped by the angels. He was there. It was comfortable, right? Could you imagine like having a place where you could sit and everyone bring everything that you need to you, and they would come and they would worship you, and that would be a comfortable place to be, right? You wouldn't want to leave that place. Jesus forsook that. Jesus came to the earth. He left that comfortable place and came down to earth. And here's the next one. We must come down by no longer worrying about status. And so what I want you to do is where you see that no longer worrying about status, I want you to make an arrow. Take an arrow and point that to verse number 6. Go on to read verse 6 right there beside it. How do I know that we must no longer worry about status? It's because of what it says in verse 6, talking about Jesus. It says, who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. So what Paul was saying is Jesus is God, but Jesus didn't care that he was God. Jesus was God, but Jesus didn't use the fact that he was God to his own advantage so that he could puff himself up, so that people could bow down and worship him, and so that he could create a kingdom for himself here on this earth. Remember the desert when Satan tempted Jesus? That's what Satan was trying to get Jesus to do. He was like, Jesus, forget about the death that you're going to have in a few years. Forget about Easter and forget about Good Friday. Forget about all the suffering that you're going to have to, endure. Instead, just create your kingdom right here, Jesus. That's what Satan was saying. You're God. You can do it. And yet Jesus said, that's not what I'm about. I don't care about my status. I'm not worrying about right now in this place what other people think about me and whether or not they're setting me up as king. They're going to see one day that I'm king. That's going to happen. It's just not in this moment. He wasn't worried about his status. And we have to be the same way. It was actually last week, Moe's, I don't know, Moe, you guys, anybody like Moe's out there? Moe's is wonderful. They had a really good deal where every kid's entree that you ordered, you got a free adult entree with it. So, we have 4 kids. So Lauren and I are like, well, we can eat 2 meals. This is going to be awesome. 2 meals each, right? But we didn't really do that. But so we went to Moe's, and we were sitting there, and this just hits home for me right in this moment because we were sitting there eating, minding our own business. It was a comfortable place, and we were just sitting there, and I look over in the back, kind of off to the side, in that back stall, there's a guy, and obviously he's homeless. And he's sitting there, and he just has one of the Moe's water cups, and he's drinking the Moe's water's cup, and I just kind of keep watching him. And have you ever had those moments where, God, nudges at you to do something? And you're like, God's wanting me to do something here. Now, I was feeling that. And what happens when that happens? For those of you who are holier than me, then you're like, I just go do it. I'm not there yet. I'm still a work in progress. When that happens, I ask a few questions. Is that going to be uncomfortable for me? I ask the question, well, how's that going to affect my status? And in that moment, God was like, go do something. Anything, something. And I look over, and so I keep watching him. I have this battle going on in my mind, in my heart. Am I going to obey God? Am I not? Am I going to stay comfortable where I'm at? Am I just, keep my status here, not worrying about that? What am I going to do? And I keep watching him a little bit, and then he reaches into his coat, and he pulls out a bottle of liquor. And he takes a couple of sips of it, kind of looking around, then he puts it back in. And so then it's like the next level of, now what are you going to do? Are you going to judge him for what he's doing right now? Are you going to look at him different? Are you going to take pride in yourself for you not that? Because that takes it to another level of, how am I going to react to this? Am I going to think that he's creating this problem on his own? Am I going to say, well, he deserves what he's in? What am I going to do? And in that moment where I'm sitting there at Moe's with my family, my eye is on this homeless man in the corner over here. God is nudging me to do something, and in my mind, I'm wanting to be comfortable. And in my mind, I'm wanting to just keep my status as is right here. And in my mind, I'm wanting to decide that, he's probably had it coming. He probably made those things happen on his own. I just don't want to do anything. And I was fighting with myself just a week ago in the Moe's. And so even as I picked up all of our trash and I was taking it over to the trash can, and he was sitting right here, even as I was walking over there, I was looking over and I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know. And so finally I put it up and I just said, hey man, can I get you something to eat? Is there anything I can do for you? And he said, no, thank you. I'm straight. It's good. And so I was like, that's good. And so I did something, I overcame some of that. And then I was telling this story in the first service, and you know what I realized? Man, Jesus would have done so much more than that, wouldn't he? Jesus would have come and he would have sat down with that man. He would have gotten that man's story, and then he would have offered him much more than just a little meal or some chips. He would have offered him himself. He would have offered himself as the living water like he did to the woman at the well. He would have offered himself as the bread of life like he did to the crowd after he fed the 5,000. Jesus would have done so much more. So even in that little act of obedience, I was still being disobedient because I was still being comfortable. I was still in my own little place. I was still not fully glorifying God with that action because there was just so much more that I could have done and that Jesus would have done. And so here's the next one. We must come down by renouncing our pride. Take your pen and point that over to verse number 7. Because this is what it says right after it says he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped. This is what it says in verse 7. Read along with me. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. He did not consider equality with God something to take to his advantage. He instead made himself a servant. He took on the dirty messiness of human life. He came to this world that he could look down from heaven and see that we were really, really messed up. Jesus could look down and see that everyone had kind of gone their own way. He could look down and see that everyone had decided not to follow God. He could look down and see how incredibly wrong things were and how messy they were and how messed up they were. But he chose to come down. He chose to be made in human likeness. He chose to take the form of a servant so that he could glorify God with his life. You see, in Moses that day, I was struggling with this. I like to think I'm a pretty selfless person. I don't have a lot of pride, but the reality is we are all filled with pride. And that was my struggle. I was too proud to go and sit down with that man. I was too comfortable to go and take a little bit of uncomfortable, because I was thinking, my family's here. They're going to think, what is he doing? They're going to be weirded out. This is going to be a bad situation. And it was just all me justifying my disobedience to God. And that's what it was. And so we must come down by renouncing our pride. And here's the last one, the most important of all. We must come down by sacrificing our life. And you can take your pen and you can point sacrificing our life to verse 8. It says, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And so when Jesus came that Christmas morning, when he was the Son of God and he looked down and knew this was his time, he knew what it meant. He knew even as a baby, before he even entered into Mary's womb, that this would mean an incredibly uncomfortable death. It would mean suffering. It would mean just a very rough life that ended in death, ended in God looking away from him by putting the sin of humanity on him before he was lifted up again, and he did it anyway. There's not many of us that will ever be called to sacrifice our whole lives for the cause of Jesus to glorify God. But honestly, every single day, God is calling us to sacrifice for him. If we're followers of Jesus, if we want to take this seriously, there's no way we can live our lives without constantly being called to sacrifice for the good of God and for the glory of Jesus. It just happens, and so we have got to follow that. And so here's the deal. Christmas is about glory, as I said before, coming down and being made available to us, right? Jesus came down, showed the glory of the Father, and he didn't show it. He actually made it available to us by dying on the cross one day. And so Christmas is about glory coming down and being made available to us. And so what that means is that Christmas is about us coming down to make glory available to others. If you truly believe the best way to glorify God is to see what Jesus did and try to do the same things, then the best thing you can do this Christmas season is to come down just like Jesus did and make the glory of God available to other people. And we're not in heaven, we don't come down to earth, but we come down by the things we mentioned before, by renouncing our pride, by stop worrying about our status and how other people see us, by being willing to sacrifice things in our life, by not staying so comfortable all the time and be willing to get a little uncomfortable and do a few things that are very, very, very sacrificial. And so here's where I think we can end up, is we must come down by asking the right question. I want to give you the wrong question, and I want to give you the question that honestly probably most of us ask most of the time. And this is that wrong question. It's this. It's, what can I get away with? Have you ever asked that question? Maybe not out loud, but maybe in your mind. Maybe you have someone in your family that is a little harder to deal with, and you ask the question, well, what's the least I can do to let them know that I still love them and I care about them without doing anything more? What can I get away with? Or maybe there's someone this is what I was asking at Moe's. I see this homeless man over here, and I'm like, what can I get away with enough to be obedient, to share God's love, to do something for him so that I feel good about myself? What can I get away with? Maybe you have friends who have a lot of different things that you deal with them, and you're asking the question, well, what can I get away with? And maybe there's someone who has a need, and you're like, what's the least I can give? What's the least I can give to feel good about giving, but I don't give anything else? What can I get away with? And what I realize is Jesus never asked that question. Jesus never asked the question, what can I get away with? Because here's what Jesus could have done. Jesus could have come that Christmas morning. Jesus could have lived a sinless life, never done anything wrong, not make any mistakes, follow the law. Jesus could have died a sinner's death. Jesus could have risen again, and he would be okay, and he would have paid for the sins of all of the world. Jesus didn't have to feed the 5,000. Jesus didn't have to heal the sick. Jesus didn't have to calm the sea. Jesus didn't have to have those really difficult and hard conversations that he had, with the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders. There's so many things. Jesus didn't have to call 12 disciples and walk with them through their just stupidity and ignorance and try to help them learn and see there's so many things that Jesus didn't have to do if he would have asked the question, well, what can I get away with and still fulfill God's purposes for my life? He didn't ask this question. He asked a different question, and this is the right question. How can I live and love sacrificially to the glory of God? And so think about every moment in Jesus' life, he was asking this question. And so Jesus didn't have to feed 5,000 people, but he knew that if he was going to live for the glory of God sacrificially and was going to love people in a sacrificial way, that he had to do it. Jesus didn't have to go out of his way to heal people, but he knew that if he was going to live sacrificially and going to love sacrificially, then he had to do it. Jesus didn't even have to come down to earth for us and save us. He could have let us all stand in judgment until we died and end up in hell. But he knew living and loving sacrificially was his coming down to the earth. And so I think this is the right question. This is the question that we must ask ourselves this Christmas season and every day of our lives. Stop asking the question, what can I get away with? I do it. I do it all the time. We sit there in our comfortable houses on our couch, or we get a phone call or a text from someone, and you're like, oh, man, here we go again. And the question is, well, what's the least I can do? What's the least I can do? What's the least I can do? And God is calling us to so much more. If we take Christmas seriously, that Christmas is the embodiment of God's glory, where Jesus came and lived and loved sacrificially to the glory of God, then we are called to do so much more. And so maybe you've heard this statement before, helping people find their way back to God. That is the vision, the mission of Cedar Creek Church. You've heard countless number of people stand up here and say, we at Cedar Creek Church are all about helping people find their way back to God. And that can be a little vague, how do I do that? I can say, yeah, I'm helping people find their way back to God without actually, taking that and saying, well, how do I know whether or not I'm doing it? And this is what I want to do. I want to challenge you by saying this. What if you added this statement to it? What if it's not just helping people find their way back to God, but this is the way we do it. We help people find the way back to God by living and loving sacrificially to the glory of God. Now I ask that question to myself, and I'm like, oh man, I am failing at this. I am not doing very good. Yeah, I'm helping people find their way back to God, but I'm doing it on my terms. I'm doing it when I'm comfortable. I'm doing it where my status is not affected. I'm doing it where I can keep my pride. I'm doing it for me when it's best for me. But I say, when am I doing it when I'm really loving people sacrificially? When am I doing it when I really live a sacrificial life day in and day out? That kind of ups the ante, doesn't it? That makes this Christmas season a little bit harder, but a lot more lived to the glory of God. And so what I want us to do as we close out this morning, I want to challenge us all. This is challenges for me as well. It's for all of us. Is if you look at your handouts, your outlines, you'll see a little orange box at the bottom. Based off of this, I don't want us just to come in here and hear a message about God's glory, about living for God's glory, by living and loving sacrificially and saying, that's cool, that's awesome, I'm glad Jesus did that for me, and then go out these doors and it doesn't change anything about us. So what I want to challenge you to do is to think about this orange box. And it says, this Christmas I will live and love sacrificially to the glory of God by what? What is a step you can take in your faith? What is a step you can take in your life where you are not just going to kind of go through the motions of Christmas and celebrate the normal things, but this Christmas season do something that's sacrificial, that's loving someone sacrificially, that's living a little more sacrificially, just like Jesus did when he came and he lived on this earth and lived a sinless life and died for us. Because when we do that, we can really have a meaningful Christmas season. If we don't do that, then Christmas is just another holiday. So what I want to challenge you to do as Ben and the worship team are going to come out, there's going to be one song, and some of you guys may be like, I know exactly what I need to do. Like you may be sitting here saying, yeah, God has been tugging on my heart. God has been nudging me just like God nudged me last week. God's been nudging me to do something, and I've been fighting against it. I have not wanted to do that, and maybe this is the moment you can say, yes, this is what I'm going to do for Christmas this season, to live and love sacrificially. Maybe you need to think about it a little more. Maybe you need to pray about what is something I can do to live and love sacrificially. Just so you know, like Lauren and I talked about this Thursday night. I had a head start because I knew what I was going to speak on here. But so we were talking about it, and so we have this is not to say, look what we're doing, we're so great, or anything like that. Just to give you an idea, we were talking on Thursday night about this, and we have a lot of friends and family who are adopting. From either in the States or overseas. And, we said, how can we put our money where our mouth is? I can't get up here and just say this and then not do it ourselves. And so we've decided that we're going to give sacrificially to some of the families and the friends that are adopting to help them along with their adoption process. It could be something as simple as that. It could be something where you give. It could be some time that you spend with someone that you weren't going to spend time with. It could be going to someone's house or going as a home group and helping someone, or a school in your school partnership, whatever it might be. What is something you can do that you weren't going to do, but now that you're being called and challenged to live sacrificially and love sacrificially, you say, you know what, I'm going to do this. And what I want to challenge you to do before you leave this morning, whether it be now, whether it be when we're singing this last song, write down something in that orange box. And the last challenge is, it's easy to write something down here, isn't it? Like I could write anything I want to down there, throw it in the trash on the way out, and totally forget about it. Don't just write it down, do it. And one thing I want you to do to help you with that is I want you to make this commitment known. So one of the things that I'm challenging you guys to do, if you have social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it may be, why don't you share this as a post? Why don't you share on Facebook as you get home or even before you leave here this morning and say, write exactly what it says here. This Christmas I will live and love sacrificially by, and write it out and then say, how about you? And then you put these hashtags. Because the good thing about hashtags, you can click on them, you can see who's going to do something, and then you can encourage each other. You can be like, that's awesome. Way to go. Let me know how it goes. Maybe you see someone who wants to do something similar to you. Hey, let's partner up and do something together. So I want to encourage you to figure out what it is you're going to do to live and love sacrificially the same way Jesus lived and loved sacrificially. Make a decision on that before you leave this morning. Write it down. Maybe it's you individually, maybe it's your family. And then share it with the world so they can know and make a commitment to it. So I'm going to pray for us, and as I'm praying, be praying and asking God, what is it that I can do? What is it that you can do to live and to love sacrificially? Let's pray. God, we thank you for your son, Jesus. We thank you for Christmas. We don't thank you for Christmas just because of the fun decorations or the fun gifts, or even for family, because family's around and we get to see them. All that is great. But God, we thank you for Christmas because it means Jesus came down to us. It means that Jesus knew he was going to have to live a sacrificial life, that he was going to have to love people sacrificially. And so he came down to earth that Christmas morning. And God, it's no different for us. If we want to glorify you the same way that Jesus glorified you, we must live sacrificially in the same way. And so, God, I pray that we would take this challenge seriously. I pray I would take this challenge seriously. I pray I would live and love sacrificially in a way that I wasn't going to during this Christmas season, so that I can bless someone else, but most importantly, so that I can glorify you and show the magnificence and the beauty and the love and the grace and mercy that you have and that you offer all people this Christmas season. And I pray these things in your son's name. Amen.